coming through my.
And welcome all to edition 42 of Life is People. Today's guest is Robert Kelsey, author of many books, but the particular book I want to focus on tonight is the book, as anyone's been watching the last few podcasts, I've been completely raving on about, called The Outside Edge. So, but first, to start from anything, good evening, Robert. How are you doing?
I'm very good. How are you?
I'm really good. Like I say, it's one of these books. I tell you how I came to sort of get hold of this book is my partner. She sort of picked it up on W.H. Smith's, and then read it all the way up from Manchester on the train, and she was just completely blown away by it and told me to read it. And so that's kind of how I kind of came across you, really. So I mean, I think a really sort of good place to sort of kind of start with this really was, what made you write this book?
I wrote it because obviously I've been writing a series of books. Mostly they had been based on what I realised were a series of symptoms. One was fear of failure, which brought up what's stopping you, which was so I wrote about which was the original book I wrote, and that was obviously still out there selling. And the next one was about confidence, and then the third one was about procrastination. And then eventually I sort of realised that all these symptoms were actually added up to a type of person rather than just being a series of symptoms. And so I sort of focused on looking at the type of person, and that became an idea of, well, who was I, and that's an outsider, and then obviously researched it a bit better and or a bit more deeply, and also came across Malcolm Gladwell's latest book, or at the time was his latest book, called David and Goliath, in which he said that outsiders and misfits, which I clearly was, had enormous advantages. And I read that, I thought, what a load of rubbish. They absolutely have enormous advantages. They have enormous disadvantages. And sure, they have things like creativity and guile and original thinking that can be used to your advantage, absolutely. But the disablements they have in terms of dealing with people, in terms of their sensitivity, in terms of all those sort of social interactive aspects, they are hugely disabling for them, and they outweigh any advantages. And so I felt that there was something to say regarding that, and also being positive, not just negative, but actually saying, okay, well, given that outsiders do have these disadvantages, what can they do to actually make Gladwell right? So I was attacked Gladwell, if you like, but I also wanted to make his thesis correct in that you could then say, well, what do the outsiders that he was talking about, who have these advantages, what do they have that they can that others can acquire? And so that's the route I've taken. It is how outsiders who would normally be disadvantaged, how can they succeed? So that's really the background to why I wrote it.
Well, that's a kind of perfect kind of thing I definitely wanted to sort of like definitely chime in with you and talk to you about. I mean, obviously the main sort of question stemming from that what you're just talking about is, what would you say the main, I mention this because obviously a lot of people that, you know, the reason we sort of set this podcast, and a lot of people we've had as guests and a lot of the audience tend to be creative people, as I said to you earlier on. They're free thinkers and just people who are generally on the outsiders. And one of the things that we spent a lot of time talking about in this podcast, it was exactly the two things you just mentioned then. One being the disadvantage, I suppose, from being an outsider, which can be the tendency to be, you know, fall into depression, which can lead into serious, you know, and eventually into suicide. So one of the things I wanted to sort of like ask you, and I know you sort of talk about it a lot in your book, was what would you, from your point of view, would say one of the main advantages or the advantages of being an outsider?
I think the key advantage is that you have a unique vantage point. But I think it's only an advantage once you've learned to utilize it. I think actually have a unique vantage point is a huge disadvantage until you learn to turn it into an advantage, and that has to be something you acquire over time, and there's all sorts of processes you have to go through in order to get to that stage. But once you get to that stage, then that unique vantage point you have, the fact that you are on the outside looking in, the fact that you do feel slightly uncomfortable no matter where you are, no matter what situation you're in, that can work to your advantage. It makes you a great observer of life and of people, and once you step through the mirror and realise that actually it's all about the impact you have on people rather than the impact they have on you, then that becomes quite empowering, and it's at that point you can start using it to your advantage. But it's a long journey, that, and I'm somebody that, I'm older than I look, and I have taken a lot of time to get to that point. And even today, I battle regularly with the disablements of being, with someone that I would consider, I consider on the outside, someone that doesn't really belong anywhere.
Well, yeah, I mean, one of the things that you tap into in your book, and you have a sort of a section where you call it the 10 signposts towards finding meaning. And I'll just quickly run through them all, and then I would love you to give an overview and more, an in-depth sort of thing. But just generally, they were: number one, finding focus on anguish, make it a positive pursuit, look for the right place, what holds your attention, ignore monetary concerns, broaden your horizons, open your mind, discriminate, do some research, and beware the saviour. Now, that's a great overview of all those, and I would love you to sort of either tap on one of those or all of them. But the particular one that I find most sort of fascinating that was actually number 10, about being aware the saviour, because I think we're conditioned in our society to always look for the saviour, and I think it's one of the failings of us as outsiders, or just generally of society generally. We're always looking for that. So just on those sort of 10 points, I mean, please expand and let.
Okay, let's start with that one, the saviour. And again, that comes from experience. In that, if you seek, so you shall find. And what happens if you're an outsider and you have that sense of discomfort with people and situations, and also where you're going in life, you can find yourself being recruited by people that do know where they're going in life. So if you don't know where you're going in life, it's not just it's a passive thing in that you'll just drift around. What will happen is that you could end up being recruited by people that do, and they won't have your best interests at heart. They might say they have, and you might end up believing they have, but they haven't. They might. If you know where you're going, there's certainly a point at which you can share the journey, if you like. You can share the road, and because you're both going in the right direction. But if you're looking for them to save you, I think that you would be. I think that you could end up being not only disappointed, but actually more than that, angry, feeling cheated. I mean, all sorts of negatives that you've spent a lot of your life feeling probably would just be compounded by the fact that that this guy came in and said, hey, follow me, I'm going to save you, because that's what he knew you wanted to hear. And so of course, but really all they really wanted was a crew for their boat, which is how I put it. Which is, so they're the captain and they need a crew. So the idea that you can be saved by someone else is nonsense. The only person that can save you is you. Having said that, there's certainly other people can help you, and you can be fellow travellers, but each person has to have their own goals and their own and has to save themselves. And no one's going to come and rescue you, and if you think someone's going to come and rescue you, chances are they're lying. And chances are they're trying to get something out of you, your labour mainly, for their purposes. So so hence you've got to create your own goals, and I think goal setting, individual goal setting is very important, and hence you didn't take that back and say, well, find meaning, and that goes back to my favourite philosopher, which was Viktor Frankl, who said that he wrote a book, Man's Search for Meaning, and he said that suffering and outsiders do feel suffering. There's no doubt about it. They have sensitivity. It's not suffering compared to his suffering, where he was a Holocaust survivor, but that doesn't make your suffering illegitimate. It just says that he has an insight into suffering, and he said that is cured. Not cured, that's the wrong word, but suffering ceases when it is given meaning. So, and how he did it was that he realised in the concentration camp that he was being given this enormous insight into suffering, and he was going to therefore lecture on the human condition once the war ended. And so that made him. He said it made him freer than his captors, than the people who were guarding the concentration camp. He was freer than them because he could objectify the whole thing. The whole thing was a lesson in suffering for him. It was an extraordinarily powerful thing, and I think that we can all find that. There was a friend of mine recently, a female friend of mine. It turned out that she was brought up in various homes in London. It turned out that she'd been abused in these homes, and she wrote a book. And actually, various friends of hers were very critical of this book, saying that she shouldn't have done it. She now had children, and that they'd be ashamed, etc., and embarrassed. It was quite graphic, this book, about what happened to her. And I said to her, no, absolutely not. Read your Viktor Frankl. You own that. That suffering is yours. You now own suffering. It's the one thing they cannot take away from you, the people that did that to you, is the fact that it's now yours to do with what you like. You have absolute freedom in that, and so absolutely you should write a book. You should give that suffering meaning by writing the book, and that's what she did. And I fully supported it.
Yeah.
But it's not easy. Also, her saying that shows that, or her doing that shows that it's not easy. There are lots of concerns and barriers in terms of humiliation, people advising you that you shouldn't do that. I mean, I've had enormous fallouts with my sister over me bringing up some things that happened in the past, etc., etc. But so be it. If you want to feel like eating, that's one of the things that you have to face.
Yeah, it's one of the things that you sort of you have a whole chapter on, and you mentioned, and it comes up quite a lot in the book, and it was one of the things I wanted to sort of like discuss with you. Is you mentioned the fixed mindset versus the growth mindset. Now that's something I would love you to expand upon, but as a sort of supplementary sort of question to that was, when I read that, I just wanted to know what your thoughts were. Do you think that outsiders are born, or do you think that outsiders it's something that we, like I say, it's something it's the old nature nurture one. I mean, do you think outsiders are nurtured, or do you think it's something they're actually genetically born with?
Well, I really don't want to get in that fight, to be honest. If you don't mind, but one thing I would say is that from all the readings, and I'm not a psychologist. I've done a lot of research on this area from other psychologists. Sorry, but there's a lot of talk about sensitivity as a baby. That something like about 20% of babies have a hypersensitive, and I know my youngest was, and that can lead to concerns over trust and mistrust with the parents, etc., or perhaps mistrust with anyone but the parents. Often that then leads. Often they then learn to integrate, and it's fine. But a big number of them don't, and they remain sensitive as babies, and they move into becoming toddlers where they don't develop initiative, and they sort of develop sort of shame and doubt, etc. And that can lead into self-esteem issues. And there's all of that sort of stuff. So that starts very young. And so you could trace it all the way back, and then you can say, well, is that nature or nurture? Who knows? If you read Daniel Goleman, Emotional Intelligence, he talks about certain hormones and chemicals that people are born with that mean that you have extra sensitivity. I've no idea. It's not my world. But actually, then also that can either be compounded, but it also quite normal people can find themselves perhaps having elements such as family stress, divorce, sibling problems, all of that. So as you go through childhood, there's lots of various other issues like that that can come in, that can make you feel estranged. Also, there are tiny things. For instance, tiny things, silly things. For instance, some of my ones are very small in that I was brought up in a housing estate in a cul-de-sac where I was the only child, and all the other kids my age were in cul-de-sacs sort of streets away, so I was slightly on the edge immediately. Tiny thing, but that then compounds it. And what would then happen was that actually what I would do in order to try and integrate was I would my behavioural, I would suggest the more racy things to do, like go shoplifting or do a bit of vandalism with farm machinery and things like that. And of course, then the parents kick in and say, "No, he's the bad boy. You shouldn't go. You shouldn't hang around with him." Suddenly, before you know it, you're on the edge. You're absolutely on the edge, looking in. And it's tiny things like that that then can be compounded that generate self-behaviours. And so I think that who knows. Whether it's nature or nurture, but there's certainly things compounded right the way through. You then get into adolescence where identity issues start emerging. Some people sort of slip into an identity very happily. Other people, and I was especially like this, where you have a sort of identity hopping, if you like. When we were young, much more now than now. I think there's certain youth tribes now, such as I guess, but when we were young, there was a whole series of sort of music-related tribes you could join, if you like, the heavy metal, and the sort of mod revival, even the skinheads and the boys, all of that, the casuals, all of that, and you could join them, and I would find myself wanting to join them all, and never quite managing to join them, or a minute I joined them, I'd sort of find that maybe the heavy metal gang was slightly more appealing or something. So there was always a feeling that you were on the edge and on the outside and didn't quite fit in. And it may well have been there were others that felt that as well and just got on with it. But actually, an outsider doesn't just get on with it. That's exactly the difference. Is that they, a number of people, including my mother, said to me, "Oh, what's your problem? Why don't you just get on with it?" And it's like, well, that's the difference between you and me. I don't just get on with it. I sit and analyse it, stare out of the windows, thinking about it, and that's what makes me an outsider. It's what it is that kind of emotional look at the view of the world, that vantage point I talked about earlier, and it is that you're an outsider. It's a very self-diagnosing condition, and it can then go on and on and on. Once you're at university, for instance, I was the Essex lad. Found myself at university, having gone to night schools, etc. So not only was I a little older than my peer group at university, I was also, this sort of poorly educated Essex lad, and had no idea about sort of behavioural norms, etc. that were very normal at university. I was completely divorced from it, and liked it, wanted to integrate, but just simply couldn't. The too many classic sort of faux pas. They'd never met anyone quite like me. And of course, I felt like a sort of fish out of water. And again, it's a classic outsider thing. So there's all sorts of, so it can kick in at any moment. It doesn't, but I do think if you're young, it happens to you young. I think what will happen is that even if you feel at a certain point you've arrived and found your tribe, something will happen that will trigger that. You feeling kicked out of that tribe, or feeling not welcome, or feeling that you do. I think that it becomes ingrained early on, whereas actually the discomfort you feel, say, going to university as the only working class person, well, I think if you felt like, if you didn't have that overall discomfort, you'd, I think you probably learn to integrate better. So I think it's, so it is chicken and egg, absolutely. Nature or nurture, who knows? But I think there are various points at which it kicks in or compounds as you get on, as you get older.
Yeah. I mean, this sort of like for people who obviously haven't read your book, and it's something that you talk about a lot. I mean, I just mentioned this then. Sort of just gives a general overview of what fixed mindset is compared to a growth mindset.
Well, this isn't my work. It's Carol Dweck, who is a Stanford University professor. And Stanford University is obviously, it's a great university for psychology. It was a place that came up with the marshmallow test and all that sort of stuff. And she wrote a book called Mindset, and she divided the world into two types of people who have fixed mindset, people who had a growth mindset. And actually, what tended to happen disastrously, and I think that this is a key thing for outsiders, is that outsiders do tend to have a fixed mindset, and actually what they need to get on is a growth mindset, and they have to convert from one to the other. What a fixed mindset is the notion or the inner feeling and conviction that your attributes are fixed, that you are as you are. So perhaps you think inwardly you think you're a bit stupid, you're a bit thick, and you think that's fixed, and therefore every time you meet somebody, what you're trying to do is prove to them that you're a good person, that you're an intelligent person, or whatever. So you're trying to overcome perhaps your own self-perceived failings. And of course that stops you learning anything from them, because you're simply trying to project. If you then flip to a growth mindset, of course every time you meet something, that's just the start of what you can learn from these people. So you're a much better listener, you're trying to absorb information from them. So that's an inherently more confident position. Oddly, the less intelligent you come across, the more confident you seem to be. And so it's an absolute classic, and she used the example of computer training, where they divided a class into two, and they said to one group, this sort of computer programming class, they said to one group, it takes talent. You've got to have a talent for this. If you haven't got a talent for it, you'll never get anywhere. And what happened was that they all started dropping out and they lost confidence. And then there was the other half. They said, actually, it just takes lots and lots and lots of practice. And of course, they learned as they went along, and they became more confident. And so it's that classic divide. So that's the growth mindset and the fixed mindset. And I think that one of the places I start, and that's not the only thing, but it's one of the places I started saying that's an absolutely vital aspect. And the trouble with it is that, of course, it's easy to then go, you know what, I'm going to have a growth mindset. And you can walk out and go, right, I have now got a growth mindset. And you walk out, and for the next 10 minutes, you'll have a growth mindset. But of course, what happens is something will happen, and you'll fall back. And before you know it, the next day you'll have a fixed mindset again, because that's your default position. So you've got to remind yourself constantly to have a growth mindset, almost before every meeting, before every time you talk to anybody. You've got to have that in your head. And it's also very enabling if someone lacks confidence when they meet people. In fact, the reason they lack confidence is because they're too busy trying to project their intelligence, etc., or project that they're a good person, and that makes them tense. Whereas actually, if you went into a networking evening or something like that where there was social tension, you just thought, you know what, I'm just going to try and see what I can learn from all these people. That's very enabling, actually, very, very enabling. So, yeah. But you've got to remind yourself of that each time.
Well, I'm Rich. I'm sitting here and I'm hogging all the questions. So
that's Rich, okay. I'm enjoying listening.
Feel free to ask to chip in, Rich.
On the way in, I was driving earlier today and I was listening to a podcast. I don't know if you ever listened to Duncan Trussell, but he was interviewing Alex and Allison Gray out of New York, and they had a really interesting point that was made. And Alison Gray, I think it was on a DMT experience that she discovered this idea of how you view life. If you wake up and the first thing you think of is, or the people you associate with, all you do is discuss all the world's problems and how terrible everything is, and you all support that negative perspective, then that's the window that you look out. But you have a choice when you get up which window you're going to look out every morning. And that window, I think of like what you're saying, Mr. Kelsey, that you can have a growth perspective, which means that you have the ability to look out other windows. You don't have to look out the same window every morning. You can look out a new window, and this new window, you see possibilities. You see freedom. You see that you're appreciative for the things that you have. And so I think it tied together nicely with what you had to say.
Yes,
the idea of windows. Yeah.
Yes, I agree. I think that you talked about positivity and negativity. I think negativity is a real failing of outsiders. They tend to be terrible pessimists, and often for good reason. You know, things have not gone well, so you know, they tend to be terrible pessimists, and I think that they do have an ingrained negativity, and I certainly do. And you know, my team here will vouch for me in terms of my pessimism and concern and anxiety about certain things. And I think but actually, what I think, if you are an outsider, you have that ingrained negativity, it's not that helpful for somebody to come and say, actually, you've just got to be positive about things. You've just got to be more optimistic. It doesn't actually. All it does is make you feel bad about the fact that you're pessimistic, and you know, and you feel like you know, you feel a bit negative about things. So, and there's the author's name escapes me. I'm desperately trying to remember it. Norem, Julie Norem, I think her name is, and she wrote a book called The Positive Power of Negative Thinking, something like that. I haven't got it 100%, but it's she was on about how you can use negative thinking and pessimism in your favour, and that's certainly what I do. In that for instance, if I have to give a talk, I'm always terrified of giving a talk, and I'm so nervous of it. I just check that everything's right. I practice it. I make sure everything is working, and then, you know, so I don't leave anything to chance. And even then, I assume something I've just not considered will go wrong. But nonetheless, it's helped me over time to get public speaking right, to be better at it. And because I do worry about, I worry about the various small things, and because of that, the big things tend to go right. And so I think that there is there is a positive side to being pessimistic and being negative. It's not, and I think that who you are, outsiders tend to be negative, tend to be pessimists. You are who you are. You're not going to suddenly convert into a huge optimist. It would be a lie, because your judgment's gone. You can't judge optimism. You can only judge pessimism. Because, you know, what happens with people who insist on optimism, they say, "Oh, just be optimistic." You then take this leap of faith without any evidence, and lo and behold, you then move to completely the other extreme, because you can't judge risk. You cannot judge things properly. So I think you have to learn to accept who you are in that on that kind of risk spectrum, if you like. Accept who you are, and then try and plan so that you become things. The risk starts being ironed out, and it's time consuming. But that's it. That's who you are. You can't, you know, somebody comes along and says, "Oh, just stop worrying about it." You know, fine, but you'll stop worrying about it for about 2 minutes while they're saying that, and then slowly it'll creep back in. So, I totally hear what you're saying about windows, but unfortunately, outsiders the windows they have tend to be slightly disabling, and I'm trying to work out a way of allowing them to become more enabling.
Yeah, I think that's what probably the growth factor is. If you really do get into a growth attitude, you somehow gain an ability to view life from other perspectives. Like if you can just get a glimpse of somebody else's perspective, it doesn't mean you adopt other perspectives or you even have the ability to completely adopt another perspective, but you're willing to view life through everyone's eyes, and, you know, from the person that you despise to the person you admire. You know I think that's a healthy way. We were talking about empathy last time. We did this podcast, and the ability to have empathy for other viewpoints, and be aware that it is a matter of internalization, like you say. You internalized at a young age that you were pushed aside and relegated as a child, that, oh, he's the bad kid at the end of the cul-de-sac who just causes trouble, and all of a sudden that's your identity, and it's hard to shake that, because we're organic beings. That becomes part of the pathway our brain created, and we can't shake it off very easy. But that's the beauty of growth, huh?
Yeah, it's your default.
What was that?
Yeah, it's your default position that in fact you can travel along the road quite a long way feeling that things are going well and everything's positive, but the second anything goes wrong, you go right straight back to your default position. And your default position, yeah, absolutely, the the naughty child at the end of the wrong cul-de-sac, yeah, absolutely. And I think that is, I think that's, it's something you need to be aware of, and that's why I slightly object sometimes. And I want to come on to empathy, but I slightly object to sometimes is there a lot of neuro-linguistic programming, and I've had people that have attacked me and I don't mean literally attacked, but I mean verbally attacked me when I've done talks, are people that have NLP types who have felt that they have been cured and that they have that they're now a new person, they've been reborn and they're a new person. And of course, what I'm saying is actually you're not reborn. You're not a new person. All the disabling factors you have, you're going to die with. They're not going to go away. And by denying them, you may well be setting yourself up for quite an awful reckoning, actually. And so my view is always accept them. Accept your disablements and move along with them and be honest about it, rather than move into this sort of this complete denial and this feeling that you're a completely newborn person, and actually you're just the old person shouting very loudly in order to drown out the old person, and that that's very dangerous in my view.
I think the perfect example of that and how dangerous it is I have a friend who. He realized early on in his life that he was gay, and then in his 20s, late 20s, he reads a book that basically explains this is why you're gay. It's this trauma, etc., that you experienced as a child, and all of a sudden he decides he's not gay, and he goes off and gets married. And so, yeah. And then of course the kid at the end of the cul-de-sac rears his head eventually, yeah. Right? And it's like this is who you are. It's not a choice. Your genes, the way you think, and your patterns of your mind aren't even your choice. Yeah. You can grow and work with them. You can give them names. If you have serious issues, give it a name and deal with it and say, oh, I know who you are. You're coming back up. I'll deal with you later. I'll deal with you now. But you deal with it. And work with it as part of your landscape, and maybe that's what it is. It's like a landscape that we have to deal with.
Yeah,
and each one of us has our own landscape.
I think which you can work with and you can improve, and I think that you can. There's all sorts of positives about that, but I think that the idea of denying who you are and denying some of that negativity, I think, is denial. I think that is you're just simply not being honest with yourself, and therefore you're not being honest with other people. And I think that suddenly you're going to be. You're going to be living a lie that you may well convince yourself of, absolutely, but it's a hell of a dangerous position to be in. And I think that, as you say, I think with your example, your friend, eventually the default kicks in. The default person kicks in, whether it's whatever it is, whatever stress that generates that. But I want to come on to empathy, because one of the things I liked you were saying about empathy, and that outsiders can perhaps have empathy and develop empathy, but actually, which is, I think, great, but they can. But one of the things about outsiders, one of the traits I mentioned was about what I call distorted empathy. Mm-hmm. They tend to have this great idea. They root for the bad guy, like they tend to understand it, what's going on in their heads, and I think that it is, and I think it's very important as you progress that you don't lose that. Actually, it's a very strange thing. People don't. People think you end up being accused of being a bad person. For instance, horror of horrors. I was living in the States in the Columbine massacre, when I heard about what motivated them. The jocks in the school, I got it. I absolutely got it. And of course, I'm not going to wander around with Uzi and shoot on the schoolmates, but I got it. I understood it, and therefore, you do have that distorted empathy where you mention that at a dinner party, and everybody thinks you what? You know, they think you're some kind of monster. But actually, it's a breadth. It's not lacking empathy. It's what I call distorted empathy. But actually, it's a breadth of empathy. It allows you to actually really empathize with the person that is probably, you know, having a destructive effect on your life. It's also allows you to empathize with, you know, with a huge range of people that has in the end got to be to your benefit. You know,
Maybe that's
the largest point I talked about.
Maybe that's why writers like yourself are what mark of a good writer is being able to empathize with all the characters, to draw people in to appreciate a character that then turns out to be the monster. You know.
Yeah, I guess it is. Yeah, I guess. But I'm not a fiction writer, but I guess that's absolutely true. Yeah. So, I do think it's again that very thing that was a disablement, which is the fact that you're sitting there watching the news, if something terrible's happened, and you're kind of getting it. You know, you're kind of getting why the guy's just blown himself up in the marketplace. You even to that depth, you're getting it. And and I think that it is enabling. Ultimately, it may put you in an uncomfortable place, but it is enabling. There's no doubt about it. You know, and I think alienation has a lot to do with it. You know, you're the person that feels alienation because you've had that experience of alienation, however acutely. So you get that alienation is a huge motivator for bad behavior, for problem behavior.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I found absolutely fascinating about your book and very insightful was, I think it's one of the things. I mean, I would count myself as an outsider, and I think most of the people probably, you know, we've had on this, you know, podcast, and people that listen to this podcast would consider themselves outsiders. And I think one of the things that you touched upon, and I personally found it very inspiring, was the fact of, as outsiders, we can always tend to feel that we have a lack of focus, or that we're that very, you know, almost definition of being an outsider. We tend to feel that nobody else understands us, and we're always on the edge of things and trying to bash our heads around stuff. And I think it's really fascinating and a crucial sort of message that this is why I want to point as many people to your book as possible, is that I think at times that when you're in that sort of mindset, as you were talking about, you can feel that you are just bashing your head against a brick wall. I talk about it a lot on this podcast, that you feel that you're the only one, and you have I found with a lot of people, I mean, you were mentioning it earlier on, I mean, talking about the negativities, I mean, how many great artists, musicians, authors have actually drawn upon that negativity. But when you're in that position and you're being like, it's being creative in whatever form it may be, you can tend to feel that you're the only person out there, and at times it's like, I mix a lot with a lot of musicians, and I think where your book is really sort of it rises above just a general kind of, you know, just a self-help book, and I don't think that's a horrible phrase, but I mean, where it rises itself above, and I think it's a book that I would recommend to everyone else, is that as outsiders we can feel that we're just almost alone. And reason I say it's so important is that it's something that we talk about a lot in this podcast, is that negativity can lead a lot of creative people, you know, whether they're famous, you know, the Kurt Cobains of the world, right through to people we know personally, who that negativity just drives them into a dark place, which can lead to suicide. So my you know, sort of advice, you know, I would like, you know, you should sort of expand upon and stuff, would just be generally around the question, what advice would you give to outsiders? Because we can, like I say, we feel that sometimes we're lost, and I think you hit upon it perfectly in the book when you were saying that we can start one project and then we go another project and stuff like this. And I think sometimes we need someone like yourself who's, you know, just completely an outsider to the outsiders to sort of give us advice. So I mean, you talk about it a lot in your book. So, what advice would you? What advice would you generally give to the outsiders? Is my general point.
Well, I think I think there's several things. We talked about finding meaning. I think that's a key aspect to it, and then I think that another key aspect to it is the fact that you are who you are. You are alone. You are you are alone in a crowd, if you like. And so it may well be that actually the answer is to be entrepreneurial, is to consider entrepreneurial pursuits of one form or another, and to develop that entrepreneurial spirit. And what I mean by entrepreneurial, I don't mean necessarily just starting a company, although that is one aspect to it, but it's somebody that is basically working for their own account. And I think that fits in very well with artistic pursuits, but also freelancers, all those things. Because what I don't want to do is restrict it to artistic pursuits. I think outsiders are artistic. They tend to be creatives. That tends to put them in a sort of artistic zone or along an artistic plane. But there's all sorts of routes for that. Writing, that was my one. Painting and art sounds like it's your one. Music is certainly one for others. But that goes right across the spectrum. Starting a company is incredibly creative as well. Opening a restaurant is incredibly creative. All sorts of things like that. So there's a whole spectrum of things like that. But I would say it is entrepreneurial. Whatever the result is, it's an entrepreneurial result. So you need to do your own thing for your own account. Because let's look at. Sure, there's some positives here. Creativity is clearly a positive, original thinking, all of that. But there's also a few negatives. Let's have a look. We're not good people, actually. We're not team players. We're not real team players. We're actually a bit selfish. And so there's some negatives that say is push and pull. There's things that say we should do our own thing because we're creative and we'll innovate and that will succeed. But there's also negative factors that say we should do our own thing because we're not very good team players. Something we'll have to acquire and learn maybe down the road, absolutely. But initially, we need to understand that we're pretty selfish. We think we've got something to prove, and we're trying to go around going, finger to you, I'll prove it to you that I can do this. With men, often it's their father they're trying to do it with, instead of just me. And and I think that so you do feel you're trying to prove something. We are the rule breakers, often because we don't understand the rules. We don't kind of get the rules, and so there's all sorts of reasons why you should do your own thing and be an entrepreneur. So find meaning. Think entrepreneurially in whatever form, as broadly as you can in that respect. But then I think the third aspect is plan and learn to plan and learn to execute, learn to set goals. And it's all that stuff. That's the nitty-gritty that I think that, again, is the outsider kind of misses. And what that too often happens is that's where this waiting for the savior to come in occurs, and you're sitting there waiting for someone to, this knight in shining armor to turn up and save you and say, oh yes, I get it. Oh, Robert Kelsey, you're that really talented guy that no one's spotted yet. Let me make you famous. And well, it's just not going to happen. And so you have to do that yourself. You have to plan it. You have to put the work in. It's something you've got to do, and you also have to invest in it. That's another key aspect. Is that I remember being very good at planning, and goal setting and all of that. And I would get to the point where I had to spend something, not always money, but mostly money, but sometimes time, sometimes effort. But I had to invest in it. So I'd do all these plans, and I'd have to invest in it. And it was that I didn't do. And I lost faith in it at that point. So I didn't spend the money, if you like. And what I'm saying, get to that point and then spend the money. You've got to invest in it. You've got to invest in yourself. So, and a number of times, and I think that's where things like fear of failure kicks in, which was obviously what I wrote about in my first book, What's Stopping You. And I think that I think it's a real disablement, that fear of failure. And I remember being approached by somebody who ran a franchising organization and people that encourages people to go into franchising. And he said to me, he really liked the first book, What's Stopping You, because the number of people, he had thousands of people going through his system to become a franchisee, and right at the last minute they wouldn't sign or they wouldn't put the money down. And so they do absolutely everything until it got to that moment they had to put the money down, and that would kill it. And it was, how do you get them beyond that moment? And I think that's a crucial moment. And so you do have to, so, you know, let's say, find meaning, become entrepreneurial, plan, goal setting, all of that stuff. But then you've got to invest. That's the moment. You've got to take that leap. And if you don't take that leap, it might well be that there's something wrong with the planning, etc. You need to go back and think about it. Maybe it's not really what motivated you. Maybe it's what motivated somebody else, your wife, your parents, etc. And it's not what motivated you. And I think that the only thing that will get you to make that investment is what motivates you. It has to motivate you personally.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that you mentioned in your book, and it was amazing because it was like it's so chimed in with how I've been in my life personally. It's very easy to sort of I was sort of trying to tap into this earlier on, that we can set a plan, and then if it's not done by 6 months, then we get bored of it and disillusioned and we walk away. And I think one of the hardest things for people who, you know, would consider themselves an outsider is to have that long-term strategic thinking about, you know, and actually sticking to it. You know what I mean? And
yeah. Well, I think the answer there is, for me, it was not only having a long-term plan, but having using that plan as a path, and then going right the way back to now, from sort of 10 years out, then working your way back, saying, where do you need to be in 5 years, where do you need to be in 2 years, where do you need to be in 1 year, where do you need to be in 1 month, where do you need to be in 1 week, you know, and so eventually all you need to do is then tick off these moments, and once you're on that path, it becomes self-reinforcing, or it's supposed to become self-reinforcing, and so you feel that you're on the journey, and then so you'll get that feeling of arrival simply by being on a journey where you're ticking off the milestones. So
yeah, I mean, one of the things that I generally, and I think more than probably any time in my life, and I've been through some, you know, as probably most people who have been in an outsider position have been in, you can get very down and depressed. And I feel generally right now, and I say it a lot, you know, these are the greatest days to be living in. And I think one of the things that really excites me is technology. I think that I talk about it a lot on this podcast, that the ability, like, for instance, right now we've got you in London, me in Scotland, and someone else in New Mexico, and I think there's a whole wave of technology coming in and stuff that we haven't got our heads around. I just wanted to sort of have your, you know, your perspective, your thoughts on, you know, how you think that technology sort of fits in with the outsiders, and just generally, how do you sort of feel about the next sort of, you know, 10 years? Do you think that it's generally going to be a better place for the outsiders, or do you think it's going to get more and more tougher?
Well, I look at I sit here in London, and my office is close to it's in an area called Spitalfields, which is close to or abuts Shoreditch. Now, Shoreditch is the Silicon Valley of the UK, or one of them. It's the sort of it thinks it's the Silicon Valley. It's probably more the fashionable app zone of people pretending they're techies when they're not. But nonetheless, it's an incredibly entrepreneurial area. That entrepreneurship is purely is technology based, or very strongly technology based. It's not 100% technology based, but it's using the technology. And when I look around it, you wander around it in a state of awe, really, because it's the future of work. This is the future of work. There's no doubt about it. I walked into a incubator type space yesterday to meet somebody. It was called something called Second Home, and there was a cafe on the ground floor and loads of different meetings, and there was an enormous amount of things going on where everybody was sitting there with their Apple MacBook or whatever, keying in or chatting to each other or whatever, and it was clearly the future of work. Now, every single one of these people looked like they were utilizing technology for their own account, you know, in one form or another, whether they were freelancers or artists or starting a business or whatever, or selling a business or advising people or consulting, whatever they were doing, but they were all doing it for their own account. And to me, it very much looked to me like the future of work. And I think that I think we are on the brink of a new industrial revolution, if you like. Actually, we're not even on the brink of it. I think we're in the middle of it, to be honest.
Yes.
And yet it hasn't reached all places. And one of the things that I thought was interesting, just as I came on, I heard you talking about the election that's just taken place in the UK. And one of the things I thought was really interesting about that election was how old-fashioned it was in terms of work and the battle over work. And, you had two groups of vested interests. You seem to have the sort of union organised labour on the one side, and then you had sort of big business on the other side, and finance on the other side. And they seem to be arguing each other. I'm thinking, this is so old-fashioned. It's like something from the 1970s. It's ridiculous. Where was the new idea of work, which was this kind of very entrepreneurial, people working for themselves, doing their own thing, self-actualized people, pursuing their own skills, using technology in a global space, and where was that? It didn't feel like it came up to me. Everyone talked about, there was enormous discussion about all sorts of things to do with work, but nothing to do with that. And I mentioned that the other day to someone, and they said, well, the reason is because you sit in Shoreditch and you think that that's what the world looks like, but it doesn't look like that. And of course they're right, it doesn't look like Shoreditch, but it will. And I think that's that's what I think is important. That's what I think is going on. And I think that is enormously beneficial for outsiders, if you like. And it might well be that part of the reason we're having this discussion now is because of that. Because of the fact that that technology is allowing this, because of the fact that freelancing, doing your own thing, consulting, starting companies, closing companies, all of that is now, there's so much energy behind that. It allows outsiders to pursue their own way, whereas before they may well have just sat in the office or sat in the factory or sat in the public sector organisation and fretted away and wondered why they didn't fit in and tried their best to fit in, and there was this huge dichotomy between the people that opted out, who went and lived on hippie communes, God knows where, or became crusties in the West Country, and hanging out Stonehenge, and people that were in work and normal people. But there's a huge fusion going on between those two worlds. And to me, that's the future of work, and I think it's incredibly exciting. I find that really buzzy. I wish I was younger to take more advantage of it, but I guess in some ways my age gives me, again, that vantage point in that I can look at it and say, actually, this is what's going on. It wasn't always like this, guys. This is what's going on.
Yeah,
it's brilliant. I love it. I absolutely adore it. I don't necessarily, half the people you meet in this world, you meet in those campus type places, irritate the hell out of you. But they've all got these, long beards and they're very trendy, and they hate me for everything I stand for. But fine. I can live with that. I appreciate that. They'll come to appreciate me. Maybe. So but it's great fun, and I think it's the future. And bring it on. That's all I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the things. I mean, we fly this flag for on this podcast is. I mean, we've got no vested interest. I don't hold shares in the company or anything, but we talk about MaidSafe, and not right now. Not many people have heard about it, but this is the idea of a decentralized, internet, and the idea of giving power to the individual, which I think maybe, I don't know. I it's hard to know, but I kind of wonder that maybe in 100 years' time whether we'll even understand what outsiders will be, because maybe everyone will be an outsider. The idea of big corporations and big lumpings of people and big clubs and stuff like that in general form will all just generally just break down, and we all have the power to, like you said, be entrepreneurial ourselves. And that is,
having said that, tribalism, one problem that because I go into the root of outsidership, and the root I said was tribal. It was people that felt discomfort with the tribe, and there are always going to be tribes. I think you've not managed to destroy the tribe. You've managed to reform it in various ways. Got rid of the vertical divides, all sorts of horizontal divides. But the tribe, there seems to be something innate about tribe. Like when I was a kid, and I said I was a West Ham supporter. A lot of my friends were not only West Ham supporters, they were West Ham hooligans. And there was a very famous hooligan group in the 1980s called the ICF, the Intercity Firm, which is probably the most famous of the hooligan gangs, if you like. And an awful lot of them came from, not from around the football ground, not from East London, it came from Essex. Why did they come from Essex? Because their families had been uprooted after the war, and had been thrown out into the countryside beyond the green belt, and they were looking for a tribe. They'd lost their tribal homelands, if you like, and they were looking for a tribe. And so the tribe they grabbed was the football teams that their fathers supported, and of course, once you grab a tribe, you've got to be the, you've got to be the leader. You haven't got that comfort of being naturally in the tribe. You're joining it, so you've got to be the guy leading the charge. And that happened, I think, a lot with football hooligans, especially the London teams. I think that was the case. It was certainly the case with West Ham. All the fans came from Romford and Basildon and places like that. And I guess it's one of the reasons I became quite interested in all this side of things, because there very much is a tribal aspect to this, and I don't think tribes are going to go away. And I think you're right about corporations and companies and that, even organisations. I think deeper than that, of any form. I think they are going to be sort of networks. They're going to be replaced by networks, if you like. And but the power of the tribe, I think, isn't going to go away.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well,
like a group identity.
Group identity.
Yeah. Everybody wants that to some degree, and maybe on a base level, genetic level, we need it in some degree. We are just one massive organism after all, and it does take groups of people to get things done. One man couldn't have created a cell phone. It took a group of people to create a cell phone, and so in MadeSafe, it's taken a group of people to create MadeSafe. Not one, David Irvine, he's the architect, but he relies on a lot of excellent brains to bring that vision to fore. So yeah, I agree. There's always going to be a tribal effect, and it's not a bad thing. You should never look at it like a bad thing. It just is.
It's not always. It's not always a good thing, though. You saw, a classic example in Wales, yesterday. That was, extreme example of tribalism. But they will start shooting each other. That's, so you're always going to have that element. That is there. Especially young men want to be, are tribal and want to be, in that sort of comfort zone of a gang. And I think I think that's a concern. I think when you add it, I think it's extraordinary that what happened in Waco, because actually they're probably all middle class kids, or middle-class men, actually middle-aged class men shooting each other, whereas actually, the gangs in the cities are slightly different, where, they're led by the saviour, if you like. That's that classic saviour thing, and it's the gang leader, and I think that is dangerous, and I think, and it's something to watch, but the tribe's not going away. I think you can have positive tribes and negative tribes, and but the tribe's not leaving us, I don't think.
Yeah, well, obviously before we went on live, you mentioned about time constraints and stuff like that. So one of the things I kind of, before you go, Robert, I'm very keen to talk about, and I think you hit the nail spot on the head when you said that generally outsiders don't like to follow rules, but you finish your book with 10 rules for the outsiders. So please expand those 10 rules and just let people who are listening to this know what they are.
Go on, sorry, I thought you were going to read some of the rules.
I can read them for you. I've got them here. The 10 rules
well, one of them I can go through. I can go through some of the ones I think are important. I think we can't do all 10, but I think I think there's a sort of realization that about certain things, and outsiders tend to be at war with the world. One form or another, we tend to go to war with the world, and I think that a lot of it is trying to stop the war, is trying to just calm it down a bit, and for once, like for instance, some of them I said was you have to serve your apprenticeship. You're never going to become instantly a genius at what you want to do. You have to serve your apprenticeship. That means that it means you might have to work for people, even if you are even if you are an individual, yes. Even if you are an entrepreneur, yes. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't work for somebody because you're learning from them. You know, the point to leave that person is the point when you're no longer learning from them, when your apprenticeship is done, if you like. And it might be that you then go and do another apprenticeship at a higher level, but you'll always have an apprenticeship. That's certainly a key aspect. You know, you've got to serve the apprenticeship. The second aspect is there's always going to be a boss, and I think that is something you have to get used to as an outsider, that there will always be a boss. Now, what I mean by that is I don't mean there's the bloke that can come down and sack you if he doesn't like you, or he doesn't get on with you, or he doesn't like the football team you support. I mean that there's always somebody that you're going to have to serve in some form or another if you want to get anywhere, if you want to do anything. Whether it, you know, with I write books, I have to serve the publisher. You know, I can't just ignore what the publisher wants from me. You know, I run a PR company. We have clients. I can't just ignore what the clients want from me. You know, you have to conform and please people. So there's always going to be the boss. But if you're doing what you want to do, then fine, you should be able to cope with the fact that there's the boss. But you do have this ingrained rebelliousness that does make you difficult. It makes it difficult for you to accept that there's a boss. So you have to realize that the feelings you have about the boss telling you what to do are different if you're doing it for your own account and moving along your own path. They're different to the ones where you're trapped inside an organization. You have no choice but to look for some boss to tell you what to do. It's entirely different, but you're not going to get rid of that need to please people that might be further up the ladder than you, simply, and they're gatekeepers. They have the gate to what you want, whether it's being, you know, an art gallery, the owner, you know, whether it's the big buyer, whether it's the, you know, as I say, the publisher, whatever. You've got to be aware of that. So you've got to serve your apprenticeship, and you know, and growth mindset all helps on that one. And then notice that there is going to be, you know, there will be a boss. And also, I think a third thing about that, and it's related, is that you must note your progress. In that, you know, you have, like I said, the feelings you have now. You're going to die with those insecurities that you have. You're going to die with it. I talk about a monkey on my shoulder. That monkey's coming with you. You're not going to get rid of the monkey. It's coming with you. And but nonetheless, you can make progress. But because you are who you are, the feelings inside you can sometimes make it think that you're not making progress, you know. But so you've got to note the fact, you know, that here I sit in my office, you know, I've got my own company, you know, I go back to my lovely wife with her kid, with the kids, and, you know, our house, and, you know, I've made enormous progress from where I was 10, 15 years ago. But it doesn't mean I'm still the person. I still have enormous insecurities. I still react badly. I still, you know, have all these sensitivities and that I used to have. I haven't changed, but I've made progress. So you've got to note the progress. You know, mentally you might struggle still, but you've made enormous progress. You've planned for it, you've executed, you've got a result. Not all of the results have gone well, but a lot of them have. Enough of them have for you to make progress. Note it, and that's, I think, is a key rule. Yes, there are.
I think generally,
but they're enabling rules.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that generally just sort of, you know, perfectly sums that up is give yourself a break. I think one of the things that we on the outside is we never give ourselves a break. We never step back. And I think sometimes we just step back and just say, oh well, actually this is how far I have progressed. Before we go,
my ex-girlfriends used to say to me was how hard I was on myself. You know, and actually it makes you very difficult to love as a person because you don't love yourself. So how do you expect them to love you when you don't love yourself? You know, and you know, and they always accused me of, you know, normally as they slammed the door shut and walked away, they'd say, you know, just stop being so hard on yourself. You know.
Well, like I say, I mean, I would recommend everybody, and I've been saying this ever since I've read this book. Please, everybody, go out and read. You know, go out and purchase the Outside Edge. For people out there that want to contact you, Robert, how can they? What's the best way of, you know, finding you, contacting you?
Well, I've got a website, www.robert-kelsey.co.uk. So it's robert-kelsey.co.uk. Twitter, I think it's Robert Kelsey WSY, which is what's stopping you. So that's my Twitter handle. You know, but if you put Robert Kelsey into Google, I come up. In fact, me and a Scottish artist come up. So I'm not a Scottish artist. He's a landscape artist, but I think he wished I'd called myself. I think we both wish we'd called that he'd put a letter in J in it or something. But there we are. So yeah, but I'm not the Scottish artist. I'm the writer. So and I welcome many correspondence. I kind of live on it. I like it a lot actually when people write to me saying, "Oh, I like your poet, like you did." I just think it's great. It's what I'm here for.
Well, like I say, I mean, this was your book yourself was #1 recommendation in W.H. Smith's for people over in the UK who for people in America probably know what W.H. Smith's is, but it was a recommended, and I know they can purchase it on Amazon, and I'm sure, like I say, if you just Google and The Outside Edge, you'll find a way of purchasing it, and it's one of the things I often talk about. I mean, please, if, like I said to many people that I know, in this audience and listen to this thing, support people. Don't just go out and purchase this book because as I've hopefully we've seen in this last interview, you're just an ordinary person, and this is how you make your money. And so please, people, go out and like I say, go and purchase this book because it's a very I think it's one of the to me, it's definitely the best book I've read in maybe 3 or 4 years. So that's a small little compliment for me. I wanted to sort of finish before we go just on one quote, and I'll just have quickly hear your sort of like just little thoughts on it. And this is the quote: "Attributes such as creativity, strategic excellence, and strong judgment can all help give the outsiders that required edge. Yet particularly disadvantaged outsiders should be aware that any edge will become quickly blunted by the wrong influences." Just a quick little overview on that little quote, if you wouldn't mind, before you go.
Sorry, I didn't quite catch you. By the wrong influences.
Yeah.
Go on, read that last bit again.
Particularly disadvantaged outsiders should be aware that any edge can become quickly blunted by the wrong influences.
Yes, well, I think that we're partly talking about the saviour there, the guy coming along saving you, and I think the other thing I'd probably put there is, well, there's a few things I'd put there, but one of them is extremism. In that, I think that outsiders have a tendency towards extremism. I'm convinced if you would go and wander around the Occupy movement, you'd find an awful lot of outsiders in there, and and also equally on the extreme right. And I also think that a lot of cases in terms of terrorists, certainly some of the people you see being attracted to Syria from various parts of Europe, I think that a lot of those people have outsiders and very genuine feelings of alienation, etc. And again, it's that recruitment element. They're being recruited by extremists of one form or another, and so I think that destroys any kind of edge you could ever develop is if you become recruited by extremism. But I think there's other aspects to that as well. One is being overly cool. I think that another reaction that a lot of people have is that they suddenly become the cool guy. And I often quote the that image of James Dean in Times Square, and this cool image when we're young, everybody wanted to be James Dean in Times Square, wandering it. And I said, but it's actually a pathetic image because he's got to go and do something after this. He's got to go and find somewhere to stay, and he's got to buy food, and all he's got to do loads of uncool things. And the only alternative to doing that is that he actually stays in Times Square and just wanders around all day. But then that makes him that makes him just this kind of tourist. That's probably the most uncool thing you could be in Times Square as a tourist. And it's just a tourist at that point. So it's a really stupid thing is to be cool, but it's a very natural reaction in terms of a defensive mechanism when you feel that you don't belong. And So, you know, and so I think, you know, there's a danger of being cool. And so I think it's all those sort of influences of it being led towards extremism, led towards, you know, disdain and coolness and all that sort of thing. You know, you've got to get in there, do stuff, and humiliate yourself and be prepared to do it. I think, and that's what I think are the right influences, are things that enable you, are things which are actually, a lot of it's right embarrassing and humiliating, and you know you wish you didn't have to do it, but you know that's ultimately what's enabling. So I think that's I'm not really sure what I meant by the influences there. So.
Well, like I say, I mean, I'm very grateful for your time because I know you're a very busy guy.
Look,
You know,
I've really enjoyed it. It's been a pleasure.
yeah, I would love, like I say, any time we'll have to get you back on, because I think we could go. You know, we've only just sort of like scraped upon. You know, there's so much more I feel I want to talk to you about and discuss with you about. So we'll have to definitely do a second time. And,
I'd love to. And I really appreciate your enjoyment of the book. You know, strong feedback is my currency, so I'm very, very pleased to you know, that you liked it. And
like I say, we'll definitely get you back on sometime, because I think we could sit down for maybe a long time, and we could really, you know, bash our heads together and come, you know, sort of
great.
expand this whole thing a bit more. But like I say, thank you very much for coming on, and like I said, people go out and check your stuff, and well, it's been an absolute honour, and from me in Scotland, and I'm sure Rich in over there in the USA.
Yeah, it was really nice to meet you.
Well, thank you. Great. Well, I'd rather be in Arizona at the moment, I have to say, but there we are. Never mind.
Take care. I'm going to sign out.
Yeah,
okay.
Cool.
Brilliant.
Well, for all those people, then I was going to finish this podcast by saying life is people.
Cheers.